William Walters had spent his life tending to his family's farmland, a sprawling 500-acre property nestled on the outskirts of a small town in rural Missouri. The land had been in his family for 3 generations, passed down from his grandfather, who had purchased it during the Great Depression. To William, the fields were more than a source of income. They were a legacy, a living connection to his family's history, and a testament to decades of hard work. The fields were alive with golden wheat swaying gently in the breeze, rows of corn stretching endlessly toward the horizon, and the occasional burst of color from wildflowers that had found their way into the rich soil. It was the middle of harvest season, and William had been away for a few days to attend an agricultural conference in St. Louis, hoping to learn more about sustainable farming practices. Leaving his farm, even for a short while, was never easy, but he trusted his workers to keep everything running smoothly in his absence. When he pulled his truck onto the long gravel driveway leading to the property, he immediately noticed something was wrong. The air was thick with dust, and the distant rumble of heavy machinery echoed across the fields. At first he thought it might be a neighbor working on a nearby property, but as he drove closer, his heart sank. The scene before him was nothing short of a nightmare. Massive bulldozers and excavators were tearing through his land, uprooting crops and flattening the carefully cultivated soil. Large swaths of the farmland that had once been vibrant and full of life were now barren, reduced to piles of dirt and debris. Workers in orange vests and hard hats moved methodically, shouting instructions to one another as they operated the machinery. The air smelled of diesel fuel and freshly turned earth, a nauseating combination that made William's stomach churn. He slammed on the brakes, his truck skidding slightly on the loose gravel as he jumped out, his boots crunching against the ground. "Hey," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the machines. "What the hell is going on here?" One of the workers, a burly man with a clipboard, turned to face him, looking more annoyed than concerned. "Who are you?" the man asked, his tone dismissive. "This is my land," William yelled, pointing toward the flattened fields. "What are you doing on my property?" The man glanced at the clipboard, flipping through a few pages before responding with a shrug. "We're clearing this area for development. Orders came from the homeowner association." William blinked in disbelief. "The homeowner association? I'm not part of any homeowner association. This land has nothing to do with them." The worker shrugged again, clearly uninterested in the details. "Not my problem, buddy. We've got our orders. You'll need to take it up with the homeowner association." Fury bubbled up inside William as he stormed toward the nearest bulldozer, waving his arms to signal the operator to stop. "Turn it off," he shouted. "Get off my land." The operator hesitated, glancing toward the man with the clipboard, who nodded reluctantly. The machine rumbled to a halt, and the sudden silence was deafening. William turned back to the worker, his hands clenched into fists. "You've got 5 seconds to explain why you're destroying my fields before I call the sheriff." The man sighed, clearly irritated. "Look, we're just the contractors. We were hired by the homeowner association to clear this land for a new subdivision. If there's a mistake, take it up with them. We're just doing our job." William pulled out his phone, his hands trembling with anger as he dialed the sheriff's office. "This is William Walters," he said when the dispatcher picked up. "I need a deputy out at my property immediately. There's illegal activity happening here." After hanging up, William paced the perimeter of the destruction, his mind racing. How could this have happened? His land wasn't part of any homeowners association, his property lines were clearly marked, and his deeds were ironclad. He had no contracts, no agreements, no obligations to any homeowner association. This was trespassing, plain and simple, and the fact that it was being carried out under the guise of some bureaucratic order only made it worse. By the time the sheriff's deputy arrived, the situation had escalated. William had managed to stop most of the machinery, but not before a significant portion of his fields had been destroyed. The deputy, a tall man with a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped out of his cruiser and surveyed the scene. "What's going on here?" he asked, his hand resting on his belt. "They're trespassing on my land," William said, his voice thick with frustration. "They're tearing up my fields, and they're saying the homeowner association sent them. But I'm not part of any homeowner association." The deputy turned to the man with the clipboard, who looked distinctly less confident now that law enforcement was involved. "Do you have permission to be on this property?" the deputy asked. The man stammered, flipping through his papers. We were hired by the homeowner association. They said this land was part of their jurisdiction. The deputy frowned. Do you have any documentation proving that? The man hesitated, then held out a sheet of paper. The deputy studied it for a moment before shaking his head. This isn't valid. Mr. Walters' property isn't part of the homeowner association. You're trespassing. Shut everything down. The workers began to pack up reluctantly, and William felt a small wave of relief as the machinery rumbled to a stop. But the damage had already been done. Acres of his farmland were ruined, and the crops he had spent months cultivating were gone. As the contractors left, the deputy approached William. I'll file a report, but you'll need to take this up with the homeowner association directly. They're the ones responsible for this mess. William nodded, his jaw clenched. Oh, I will. Believe me, I will. That night, as he stood on the edge of his ruined fields, the weight of what had happened began to sink in. The land was more than just soil and crops, it was his livelihood, his heritage, and his future. And now, thanks to what could only be described as gross negligence or outright malice, it was gone. But William wasn't about to let the homeowner association get away with it. This was his land, and he would fight for it with everything he had. The next morning, William woke up early, the anger from the previous day still coursing through his veins. He barely slept, his mind replaying the horrifying scene of bulldozers tearing through his family's land. The early morning sunlight filtered through the curtains of his modest farmhouse, but the warmth did little to ease the tension knotting his stomach. There was no time to dwell on frustration. He needed answers. He needed justice. William sat at his kitchen table with a strong cup of coffee, the deed to his property spread out before him. The yellowed paper bore the signatures of his grandfather and the original owner, a testament to decades of legal ownership. He had double-checked the boundaries dozens of times over the years. His farm was legally and unquestionably independent of any homeowners association. Yet somehow, the homeowner association had encroached on his land as if they owned it. After a quick breakfast, William grabbed his briefcase, packed the deed, survey maps, and all relevant documentation he could find. Armed with the proof he needed, he drove to the homeowner association's headquarters, a sleek, modern building situated in the middle of a sprawling suburban development about 15 miles from his farm. The homeowner association office was cold and impersonal, with pristine white walls, marble floors, and a receptionist desk that looked more like something from a corporate skyscraper than a community management office. The receptionist, a young woman with a tight bun and an overly practiced smile, greeted William as he entered. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you?" she asked in a chirpy voice. "I need to speak with someone in charge," William said, keeping his voice steady despite the fire burning inside him. "Preferably the homeowner association president." The receptionist hesitated. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," William said flatly. "But I have a serious problem with the homeowner association, and I'm not leaving until I get some answers." The receptionist's smile faltered, and she tapped nervously on her keyboard. "One moment, please." After a few minutes of hushed phone calls, William was directed to a small conference room. It wasn't long before Barbara Hill, the homeowner association president, entered. She was a middle-aged woman with sharp features, a tailored suit, and an air of authority that bordered on arrogance. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who is used to getting her way. "Mr. Walters," she said briskly, extending a hand that William ignored. "I understand you have concerns about the recent development project." "Concerns?" William snapped, barely able to keep his composure. "Your contractors destroyed 500 acres of my farmland yesterday. Farmland that doesn't belong to your homeowner association. What I want are answers." Barbara raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by William's tone. "I understand this must be upsetting, but I assure you we acted within our jurisdiction." William slammed the deed onto the table. "This deed says otherwise. My land is private property. It has never been, and will never be, part of your homeowner association." Barbara glanced at the deed without picking it up, her expression unchanged. "That's interesting, Mr. Walters, but our records indicate otherwise. The area was recently rezoned to fall under homeowner association management. It's all very standard." William leaned forward, his fists clenched. "Rezoned? Who authorized that? And why wasn't I notified? Barbara folded her hands on the table, her calm demeanor infuriating. The rezoning was approved by the County Planning Commission several months ago. Notices were sent to all affected property owners. If you didn't receive one, that's unfortunate, but it doesn't change the facts. William's jaw tightened. I received no such notice. And even if I had, you don't have the right to bulldoze my land. Rezoned or not, this is theft and destruction of property. Barbara shrugged. We were under the impression that the land was part of the homeowner association. If there's been a misunderstanding, I suggest you take it up with the Planning Commission. William stood, his voice rising. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is an illegal land grab, plain and simple. I'm going to get to the bottom of this, and when I do, you'll regret ever stepping foot on my property. Barbara's calm facade cracked for a moment, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. Mr. Walters, I understand your frustration, but there's no need for threats. We are a respected organization with the community's best interests at heart. William didn't bother responding. He grabbed his documents and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Back in his truck, William called his lawyer, Peter Hensley, an old friend and a sharp legal mind with a reputation for taking on powerful organizations. Peter listened carefully as William recounted the events of the past 2 days. This sounds like more than just a mistake, Peter said. If the homeowner association pushed for rezoning, we need to find out why and how they managed to include your land without your consent. I'll start looking into the county records and see what I can dig up. Thanks, Pete, William said, his voice heavy. I need this resolved fast. They've already done so much damage. I'll do my best, Peter replied. In the meantime, document everything: photos, videos, receipts for any repairs you've already had to make. The more evidence we have, the stronger our case will be. William spent the rest of the day walking the ruined fields, taking photos and videos of the destruction. The sight of the flattened land, where his crops had once grown tall and proud, was a painful reminder of what he had lost. He cataloged every broken irrigation pipe, every uprooted tree, and every patch of soil that had been compacted by the heavy machinery. The enormity of the damage was staggering. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the barren fields, William sat on the edge of his pickup truck, his camera still in hand. He thought about his grandfather, who had worked this land with nothing but a horse and plow. He thought about his father, who had modernized the farm with machinery and irrigation systems. And he thought about himself, the caretaker of their legacy, now forced to fight to preserve what was left. That evening, Peter called with an update. I've got some preliminary information, he said. It looks like the homeowner association submitted a rezoning proposal to the County Planning Commission 6 months ago. They claimed it was for community expansion, but here's the kicker: they included your property as part of the homeowner association without your signature. That's not just unethical, it's illegal. William's grip tightened on the phone. What do we do now? We'll start by filing a formal complaint with the Planning Commission, Peter said. But we're going to need more than that. I'll subpoena the homeowner association's records and see if we can find out who signed off on this. If we can prove fraud, we'll have a strong case. Fraud? William asked, his anger flaring again. You think they did this on purpose? It's possible, Peter said. Homeowner associations can be greedy, especially when they see an opportunity to expand their control. But don't worry, William will get to the bottom of this. As William hung up, he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. The fight was just beginning, but he wasn't alone. With Peter by his side and the truth on his side, William vowed to hold the homeowner association accountable for what they had done. Little did he know, the battle ahead would be longer and more grueling than he could have imagined. The first rays of dawn barely lit the sky when William found himself awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind buzzed with thoughts of the confrontation at the homeowner association office and Peter's revelations. Fraud. The word echoed in his head, carrying with it a mix of anger and disbelief. How had it come to this? His land, untouched by any homeowners association for decades, was now at the center of a legal nightmare. He knew he had no choice but to take on the homeowner association, no matter how long or arduous the fight would be. The day began with a flurry of activity. William sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by documents. Property deeds, survey maps, receipts, and photographs of his ruined farmland were meticulously organized. Peter had given him clear instructions to gather everything that could establish a solid timeline and prove ownership. With a pot of coffee brewing in the background, William immersed himself in his task, methodically cataloging every piece of evidence. By late morning, Peter arrived at the farm. A tall, wiry man in his 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes, Peter carried the air of someone who had seen his fair share of courtroom battles. He wasted no time, spreading out his own files on the table and diving straight into the details. "I've reviewed the county's rezoning documents," Peter began, tapping on a folder. "The homeowner association claimed that your property was adjacent and integral to their planned expansion. They argued it would benefit the community by providing additional space for recreational facilities and housing. But what's glaringly missing is your consent. There's no signature from you, no acknowledgement of this rezoning on your part." William frowned. "So they just added my land without asking?" "Essentially, yes," Peter said. "And here's the kicker: they submitted forged documents suggesting you had agreed to the rezoning." William's jaw dropped. "Forged? They're forging my name now?" Peter nodded grimly. "It's not uncommon for homeowner associations to push boundaries. But this is outright criminal. We'll need to prove the forgery, of course, but if we do, it strengthens our case for fraud. We'll also file for damages to recover the cost of the destruction they caused." The mention of damages made William pause. "How much are we talking about?" Peter leaned back in his chair, calculating. "Between the destruction of your crops, the cost to repair the land, and the potential loss of income from this year's harvest, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars. Add punitive damages if we prove fraud, and it could reach into the millions." William exhaled sharply. The numbers were staggering, but the fight wasn't about the money. It was about principle. His family's legacy was at stake, and he wouldn't let it be trampled by a greedy homeowner association. The first step was filing a formal complaint with the County Planning Commission. Peter drafted a detailed letter outlining the allegations against the homeowner association, supported by the evidence William had gathered. The letter demanded an immediate investigation into the rezoning process and the alleged forgery. Once it was finalized, William drove into town to deliver it personally. At the Planning Commission's office, William was met with a mixture of politeness and indifference. The receptionist took his letter with a practiced smile, assuring him it would be reviewed in due course. William left feeling a mix of hope and frustration. He knew bureaucratic wheels turned slowly, but the stakes were too high to wait idly. Back at the farm, Peter was already preparing the next move: a lawsuit against the homeowner association. "We'll file for trespassing, destruction of property, and fraud," he explained. "This will force them to respond in court, and it gives us access to their internal records during discovery. If there's anything shady going on, and I'm certain there is, we'll find it." The lawsuit was filed within days, and the news spread quickly through the small town. William's case became the talk of the community, with many locals expressing outrage at the homeowner association's actions. Some had their own grievances with the organization, and they saw William's fight as a chance to expose its overreach. The homeowner association's response was swift and combative. Their legal team filed a counterclaim, accusing William of neglecting his property and claiming that the rezoning had been necessary to improve safety and aesthetic standards in the area. They argued that William's land had been a blight on the community, citing vague complaints about overgrown weeds and alleged safety hazards. William was livid when he read the counterclaim. "Blight on the community? They've never even set foot on my property until now," he fumed. Peter, ever the pragmatist, remained calm. "It's a tactic to deflect blame and paint you as the bad guy," he explained. "Don't let it get to you. We'll refute every point with evidence." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Depositions were scheduled, documents were subpoenaed, and expert witnesses were consulted. Peter hired a land surveyor to confirm the boundaries of William's property and an agricultural economist to assess the financial impact of the destruction. Meanwhile, William continued to document the damage, taking daily photos of the barren fields and keeping meticulous records of his expenses. The turning point came during the discovery process. Peter received a trove of documents from the homeowner association, including internal emails and meeting minutes. As he combed through them, A pattern of deceit began to emerge. The Homeowner Association Board had been under pressure to expand the neighborhood, and William's farmland was the perfect target. One email in particular stood out: a message from Barbara Hill to the Homeowner Association's attorney discussing the rezoning. The tone was casual, almost flippant. "Walters doesn't need all that land. He'll probably thank us once the property values go up." Peter showed the email to William, who clenched his fists in anger. "Thank me? They destroyed my land and my livelihood, and they think I should be grateful?" "There's more," Peter said, pulling out another document. It was a scanned copy of the alleged consent form William was supposed to have signed. The signature was a crude imitation, obvious even to an untrained eye. "This," Peter said, pointing to the document, "is our smoking gun. The forgery, combined with their internal communications, proves intent. They knew what they were doing, and they did it anyway." Armed with this evidence, Peter filed a motion to amend the lawsuit, adding a claim for punitive damages. The Homeowner Association's legal team scrambled to respond, but the damage was done. The narrative had shifted in William's favor, and the court of public opinion followed suit. Local news outlets picked up the story, framing it as a David and Goliath battle between a hard-working farmer and a corrupt homeowner association. Despite the growing support, William knew the fight was far from over. The Homeowner Association's lawyers were relentless, filing motion after motion to delay the proceedings. The legal fees were mounting, and the stress was taking its toll. But William refused to back down. This wasn't just about his land anymore. It was about standing up to a system that thought it could bulldoze over ordinary people without consequence. As the chapter drew to a close, William stood on the edge of his property, looking out at the damaged fields. The fight was grueling, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. With Peter by his side and the truth on his side, he was ready for whatever came next. The air was thick with tension as William Walters prepared for what felt like yet another endless round of legal proceedings. By now, the case had consumed every waking moment of his life. His morning started with phone calls to Peter, his lawyer, followed by hours of reviewing documents, attending court hearings, and fielding questions from reporters eager to sensationalize his fight against the Homeowner Association. Every time he looked out at his ravaged fields, his resolve hardened. He would see this through, no matter the cost. The lawsuit had reached a critical stage. Peter had successfully amended the case to include claims of fraud, trespassing, and destruction of property. The evidence of the forged documents and the damning emails from Homeowner Association President Barbara Hill had shifted the momentum in William's favor. But the Homeowner Association wasn't backing down without a fight. Their legal team, funded by hefty Homeowner Association dues, seemed to have an unlimited supply of resources. They continued to file motions, argued technicalities, and delay the proceedings at every turn. William sat at his kitchen table, a permanent stack of legal documents taking up most of the surface. Peter sat across from him, laptop open, typing furiously. "They filed another motion to dismiss," Peter said, barely looking up. "It's weak, but it'll still buy them time." "Time for what?" William asked, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "They've already ruined my land. What more do they want?" Peter paused, leaning back in his chair. "It's not about winning the case. It's about wearing you down. They think if they drag this out long enough, you'll give up." William's jaw tightened. "That's not going to happen," Peter smiled faintly. "Good, because I think we're close to breaking them." The next major development came during a pre-trial hearing. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with years of experience in property disputes, had grown visibly annoyed with the Homeowner Association's stalling tactics. "This court is not a venue for frivolous delays," she said sharply, glaring at the Homeowner Association's lead attorney. "We will proceed to trial unless a reasonable settlement can be reached. I strongly encourage both parties to consider mediation." The word mediation sent a ripple of unease through the Homeowner Association's legal team. Peter leaned over to William and whispered, "This is good. The judge is signaling that she's losing patience with them. They'll push for a settlement now." Sure enough, within days, the Homeowner Association extended an offer. It was insulting, barely enough to cover the cost of repairing the land, let alone the lost income and emotional toll. William rejected it without hesitation. "They think they can buy me off cheap," he said to Peter. Not a chance. But the homeowner association's offer marked a shift in their strategy. For the first time, they seemed to realize they were on the losing side. The forged documents and internal emails had left them exposed, and the public outrage over the case had only grown. Local news outlets ran stories with headlines like "Farmer Takes on Homeowner Association in David vs. Goliath Battle and Homeowner Association Accused of Land Grab and Stunning Legal Scandal." William had become a local hero, with neighbors and even strangers offering words of support. One evening, William received a call from a man who introduced himself as a former homeowner association board member. "I resigned years ago," the man said, his voice tense. "Couldn't stand the way they operated. I've been following your case, and I think you should know this isn't the first time they've pulled something like this." "What do you mean?" William asked, gripping the phone tightly. "There's a pattern," the man explained. "The homeowner association targets properties they want, usually under the guise of improving the community. They strong-arm people into selling or fabricate reasons to take over the land. Most people cave because they don't have the resources to fight back." William's blood boiled. "Do you have proof?" The man hesitated. "Not on me, but I can point you to others who've been through this. They might be willing to testify." William relayed the information to Peter, who immediately began reaching out to other victims. One by one, they came forward, homeowners who had been bullied, threatened, or tricked into giving up their land. Their stories painted a damning picture of an homeowner association that had operated with impunity for years. The final blow came during a deposition. Barbara Hill, the homeowner association president, was called to testify under oath. Peter, ever the skilled litigator, grilled her relentlessly. He presented her with the forged documents, the incriminating emails, and the testimony of other victims. Barbara's confidence began to waver, her answers growing increasingly defensive and contradictory. "Miss Hill," Peter said, his voice calm but firm, "are you aware that submitting forged documents to a government body constitutes fraud?" Barbara's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The tension in the room was palpable as Barbara stumbled through her response. It was clear to everyone present that she was in over her head. Following the deposition, the homeowner association's legal team approached Peter with a new settlement offer. This time, it was significantly higher enough to cover the full cost of restoring William's land, compensating him for lost income, and even addressing the emotional toll of the ordeal. Peter brought the offer to William, who reviewed it carefully. "They're finally taking this seriously," Peter said. "This is a strong offer, and it includes punitive damages. It's more than we could have hoped for." William considered the offer. The money would allow him to rebuild his farm and secure his future. But accepting it felt bittersweet. He had wanted more than financial compensation, he had wanted accountability, justice. "Do we have to settle?" William asked. Peter sighed. "We could take this to trial, but it's a gamble. The settlement gives you everything you need to move forward. It's your call." After a long silence, William nodded. "Let's do it. But I want one condition: they have to admit fault, publicly." Peter raised an eyebrow. "That might be a tough sell, but I'll push for it." In the end, the homeowner association agreed to the settlement, including a public statement acknowledging their wrongdoing. Barbara Hill resigned as president, and several other board members followed suit. The settlement funds allowed William to restore his fields, hire experts to rehabilitate the soil, and invest in new equipment. The sight of fresh crops sprouting from the once barren land filled him with a sense of triumph and closure. The fight had been long and grueling, but William had prevailed. He had stood up to a powerful organization and emerged victorious, not just for himself but for everyone who had ever been wronged by an overreaching homeowner association. As he looked out at his rebuilt farm, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, he felt a deep sense of pride. The land was his, just as it had always been, and no one would ever take it from him again. Months had passed since the settlement with the homeowner association, but the scars of the battle lingered in William Walter's mind and on his land. The bulldozed acres, while beginning to recover, still bore the marks of destruction. The once proud fields of wheat and corn had been replaced by freshly tilled soil, waiting for the next planting season. Yet, amidst the bittersweet recovery, there was a sense of triumph. The fight was over, and William had won not just for himself but for every farmer and homeowner who had been silenced by the overreach of a powerful organization. The news of the Homeowner Association's public apology and settlement had spread far and wide, turning William into an unlikely local hero. Strangers stopped him in town to shake his hand, neighbors who had once been distant offered their support, and reporters still called occasionally, seeking updates on his story. For the first time in months, William felt a sense of peace returning to his life. But justice, William believed, wasn't just about compensation or apologies. It was about ensuring that what had happened to him could never happen to anyone else. The morning began with a sense of purpose. William sat at his kitchen table, pen in hand, drafting a letter to the County Planning Commission. He outlined recommendations for stricter oversight of rezoning applications, mandatory notifications for affected property owners, and severe penalties for fraudulent submissions. His experiences had revealed glaring gaps in the system, gaps that organizations like the Homeowner Association had exploited for years. Peter, his lawyer, arrived mid-morning to review the letter. "This is good," Peter said, scanning the pages. "If the commission implements even half of these recommendations, it'll make a real difference." William nodded. "I don't want anyone else to go through what I did. This wasn't just about me, it's about protecting people from abuse." Peter smiled. "You've done more than most would. Taking on the Homeowner Association, winning the settlement, and now pushing for systemic change? That's rare." "Someone had to," William said simply. Later that day, William met with a group of neighbors and community members who had reached out to him during the lawsuit. Many had their own stories of conflict with the Homeowner Association, some minor, others severe. They gathered in the town hall, a small but lively group, eager to share their experiences and discuss ways to prevent future abuses. One elderly man spoke of how the Homeowner Association had fined him repeatedly for his wheelchair ramp, claiming it violated aesthetic standards. The young couple recounted how they had been pressured into selling their home at a loss when the Homeowner Association deemed their backyard unsightly. Each story added to the growing picture of an organization that had prioritized power over people. "Enough is enough," William said, addressing the group. "We can't let them keep getting away with this. It's time to hold them accountable, not just for what they did to me, but for everything they've done to this community." The group agreed to form a coalition dedicated to advocating for homeowners' rights and pushing for reforms. They called themselves the Land and Liberty Alliance, a name that reflected their mission to protect property rights and ensure fair treatment for all. William was elected as the group's leader, a role he accepted with a mix of humility and determination. As the months went on, the alliance gained momentum. They held town meetings, organized protests, and lobbied local officials to enact stricter regulations on homeowner associations. Their efforts paid off when the County Planning Commission announced a series of reforms, many of which mirrored the recommendations William had outlined in his letter. Homeowner associations were now required to submit detailed impact studies for any proposed rezoning, and property owners had to be notified in writing and given the opportunity to contest changes. Meanwhile, the fallout for the Homeowner Association continued. Barbara Hill, the disgraced president, faced additional scrutiny as investigators uncovered a pattern of unethical behavior during her tenure. Several former board members came forward, revealing instances of mismanagement and financial impropriety. The Homeowner Association was hit with multiple lawsuits from other homeowners, emboldened by William's victory, and their reputation was irreparably damaged. One day, as William walked the edges of his property, he spotted a car pulling up his driveway. It was a familiar vehicle, one of the local news reporters who had covered his case extensively. The journalist, a young woman named Rachel, stepped out with a notebook in hand. "Mr. Walters," she said, smiling warmly. "I wanted to check in and see how things are going. Your story inspired a lot of people." William nodded, gesturing for her to join him. They walked together through the recovering fields, the soil soft under their boots. "It's been a journey," William admitted. "But we're getting there. The land's healing, and so am I." Rachel took notes as they talked, occasionally glancing up at the horizon. "What do you hope people take away from all of this?" she asked. William paused, looking out at the land that had defined his family for generations. That standing up for what's right is never easy, but it's always worth it. People like the Homeowner Association count on us to stay quiet, to roll over and accept what they do. But we don't have to. We can fight back and we can win. By the time the next planting season arrived, William's fields were ready. He had hired a team of agricultural specialists to restore the soil, and the first signs of new crops were beginning to emerge. The sight of green shoots breaking through the earth filled William with a sense of hope and renewal. His farm, his family's legacy, was coming back to life. On a quiet evening, William sat on the porch of his farmhouse, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. The land stretched out before him, a symbol of resilience and perseverance. He thought of his grandfather, who had worked this soil with nothing but a horse and plow, and his father, who had modernized the farm with machinery. He thought of the generations to come, who would inherit this land and its story. The fight with the homeowner association had tested him in ways he never expected. It had been exhausting, frustrating, and at times disheartening. But it had also taught him the power of standing firm, of refusing to be silenced in the face of injustice. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, William felt a deep sense of peace. The land was his, just as it had always been, and it would remain so for as long as he had anything to say about it. Justice had been served, but more importantly, a lesson had been learned, not just by William, but by an entire community. And that, he thought, was a victory worth every struggle.